Consider this, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bales Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to the University of Nebraska at Omaha. I don't know if you're like me, but I have covered stories for nearly 2 decades on a thing called LB 775. Its formal name, we constantly refer to it as its old name when it was a bill, is the Nebraska Employment and Investment Growth Act. And it's in the middle of kind of a controversy because our state tax coffers are feeling a little skinny these days, and these benefits that we're giving out to corporations seem so huge. It might just be relative. It might even be just we're kind of money crazy right now and we're not thinking straight. But the thing is, I don't understand what to look for in economic development. But I have a guest here who's going to make us, I think, find that this is not unthinkable. This is not a subject we cannot digest.
Hopefully I can do that.
I should say who you are. This is Dr. Kenneth Kriz of the University of Nebraska at Omaha School of Public Administration. He's an assistant professor of public finance, and he was an assistant professor of public and nonprofit management at the Hubert H. Humphrey Institute of Public Affairs up in Minnesota. And he's got some specialties, among them municipal debt management, public finance, and economic development finance.
Yes.
So we're kind of in a tiz right now.
Yes, we are.
We were in a tiz 17 years ago or whatever when we passed this because we lost the Internorth later to become Enron corporate headquarters. Mm-hmm. And now we're in a tiz because we don't know if it's the right fit for us.
And I think that that is natural because in times of budget crises or budget shortfalls, we start to evaluate lots of different programs and take looks at what we can really afford to provide in the way of public services, and what types of programs we want to try and keep pursuing to try and enhance the social welfare of citizens.
Okay, so we passed this you could say there was almost an arms race between states. It was really getting hot and heavy close to 20 years ago. I know it's still going on, mm-hmm. but that was when it was just a fever.
Yes.
And all states were like throwing things on the books.
Yes, and states approached it differently. Some states took an approach where they let the local governments decide. In Minnesota, where I used to be, a lot of economic development functions were left up to the local governments. There's some good things and there's some bad things about doing it that way. In Nebraska, the legislature at that point chose to enact LB 775 and take a more statewide approach. Again, there's probably some good things for doing it that way, and there are probably some bad things.
Now, there's 2 sort of main components of LB 775, and that's investment
yes.
Credits, vesting in plants and whatever, and then there's the jobs creation credit.
Yes.
One of the big criticisms, in fact, the Nebraskans for Peace are leading a coalition of folks that are trying to get enough signatures to put possible repeal on the ballot.
Yes.
Of this, and their deadline is July 2nd for their petitions. So there is concern. There is not just a kind of a nebulous concern as there has been, but it's more pointed right now. And then there are those business groups who feel this is a necessity, this particular. But in those 2 areas, should they have been lumped together?
Well, yeah, perhaps. I mean, a lot of what I'm going to say, I think, is that a lot of it depends on the particular circumstances of what businesses are looking for and what businesses need to support their activities. In terms of lumping things together, I think what most economists would agree is that if you want to stimulate jobs in an economy, you should probably subsidize labor. You should probably subsidize jobs creation. If you want to stimulate investment, you should subsidize investment through investment tax credits and things like that. So in some ways, what that type of a strategy would indicate to me is there might not have been clarity in terms of what the goals of that we were trying to accomplish in the first place were.
As I read some of people like yourselves' research on these topics, one of the things is, and I think they're looking backwards because of the spate of bills that were passed back then, is there's a number of questions they're saying should be on the menu
Yes.
minimum number of questions on the menu of every state that passes these kinds of incentives, whether they use them as a state or local. Let me start first, before we get to sort of a list. The issue of transparency
Yes.
seems to be a big issue in Nebraska. In other words, how we're trusting this sort of group of people in the Department of Revenue that's going to make sure that A, they qualify and can get the credits, B, that they're living up to them, and then C, they just verify it. And they'll say they've created so many jobs and we're giving these many dollars in tax credits. But there's this maybe mistrust that's deserved or not over how do we really know, and how
Right.
can we tell these jobs are permanent, and how, I mean, just a laundry list of things. What about the issue of transparency?
Well, I would actually break it down into two separate issues that are related. One is transparency, and the other is accountability. Transparency would be whether citizens know and understand the provisions of the law and understand in general where things are going. Accountability would be if legislated officials or elected officials had to specifically sign off on a specific project. Now, one of the things that does concern me somewhat about LB 775 is it becomes almost a form of entitlement program. If the business pledges to meet certain goals, then pretty much they have to be approved in order to do this. There's no kind of consideration about whether this is the best use of money at the time that the project comes to the fore. So for example, a project now to create a lot of jobs might be a very, very good thing to agree to. However, a project perhaps 5 years ago, when we were in the middle of an unprecedented economic boom, subsidizing the creation of jobs when you already have pretty much full employment may actually be detrimental in the long run to the growth of your economy through raising labor costs, which is not good for attracting businesses either.
Well, I know one of the things that they're talking about in terms of being concerned is the fact that these credits can be taken over. It's sort of like you have these different plans,
Yeah.
and you can take these credits, you can extend them, you can take them maybe even after these jobs don't exist anymore. And
Right.
so we still, as I understand it, owe like $1.5 billion to the companies we've agreed to.
Yes, the companies have earned about $1.9 billion in credits, and they've taken somewhat less than $1 billion, I believe, dollars in credits. So there's still, that much that the companies have earned and still need to take. If I can just correct one thing, I'm sorry
Please
to do that.
correct me.
But another thing about LB 775 is it's not strictly speaking true that they can earn the credits and use the credits if they do not create jobs at the project site. LB 775 is a project-based incentive, which means that, for example, if I'm going to open a production plant in Fremont, I have to maintain employment levels above what I specify in my agreement with the state at that site. However, if I have another site in Papillion or in Gretna, I can close that and move that out of state. That won't affect my receipt of the credits. So you're somewhat right in that.
Or you can move them out of the
overall.
country.
Exactly. So that overall employment is not required to be kept at a certain level within the state, but employment at the site that
Site or project,
qualifies,
yeah.
that must be kept at a certain level to continue to receive the credits.
Okay, so that's one kind of question that people might want to pose in the future, or not,
Right.
depending if you're in Fremont.
Fremont or Gretna.
But the issue of the fact that we sort of owe, in a sense, it's kind of a backwards thing, but we owe them, whatever is left, whether it's $1 billion,
Right.
and they can take it. I don't say they can take it whenever they want it, but it might fall into a time like this.
Right.
When we can at least local property tax, because there's property tax, sales, and income tax
Right.
credits, as I understand it. Property tax entities such as city school districts, which are hurting because of the tax cuts. Again, the questions that we should ask when we put together something, possibly what Senator Landis, head of the Revenue Committee, calls son of 775 or daughter of,
Right.
That we have to ask. What are some of the other questions?
Well, I would ask people to think of this program and pretty much any government program as an investment. What are we getting on our investment dollars? We are agreeing to reduce our tax revenues over a specified period of time, and in return we're supposed to get employment. Now if the employment increases that are created are so great, the extra taxes from people paying their personal income tax and other things should basically either equal or exceed what we're giving up in corporate income tax. At least that's the theory. What we would want to do is be able to go back and verify whether in fact we did make good investments as a state for these types of things. But one of the issues, if I can anticipate your next question, is LB 775 as it's written is not amenable to that type of evaluation. So it's very difficult to go back and look for any particular project for certain, but even for a group of projects, whether that was a good choice to make that type of investment.
The fact that these things are difficult to discern in 775 in particular and should be looked at in any future legislation, there's also the issue of whether we should have sunset provisions on these kinds of things, which would, I think, bring more thought to the reevaluation process.
Yeah. At least there should be a periodic evaluation process. In certain states, for example, in Minnesota, each of the economic development incentive programs have to be reviewed entirely on a 4-year basis. And so there has to be at least a basic glance by an independent third party at whether the types of job gains justify the program in its existing form.
Whether what we were hoping and praying for when we passed that have come to fruition,
right,
or
whether
even
it's
close.
a good investment.
Well, I think that's what we'd like our state custodians to do. Ernie Goss, a professor down the street at Creighton, and is pretty well known across the Midwest, said in 1999 that counties with high unemployment saw no new economic growth from 775. That it helped increase the rural to urban shift. To me, and I live in a city, so maybe I don't care, but looking at the whole welfare of the state and what's happening in our state, I would think that should be a major consideration.
And again, I think that highlights the downside of the choice to let there be an overall state economic development, almost entitlement program in areas that let local governments decide more often. Local governments probably understand better what they need and when they need it. So that might be a good thing about letting local government incentive programs work instead of doing it on a state level.
There's also the issue, I guess a question you would ask, it should be on our list if this comes up again as taxpayers and interested citizens, is if there's more jobs creation incentives, what kinds of jobs?
Yes. Now there is also, beside LB 775, there's the Quality Jobs Act, which was signed into law a few years ago, and that has specific types, at least, of salary requirements. An interesting thing, if you get deeper into the numbers, I know that nobody really wants to go into those reports in
you
any
guys
kind of
like
great
that
detail.
stuff.
Yeah. But if you get a little bit deeper into the numbers, the cost per job created differs greatly between the different industries. So for example, in the food and meat processing industry, I think I calculated the cost per job created was about $23,000 per job created.
In other words, what we
state
pay in
figures.
Credits?
That's what we've given up in
us.
terms of taxes in order to create the jobs in the food and processing industries. In the financial services industries and the banking industries, that's about $58,000 per job. And again, that's using just the state figures, which I think most economists would agree are probably inflated a bit in terms of what jobs have been
Well,
created.
is that just say that, if the bang for the buck is bigger, we pay more?
Yes.
In other words, if the income is greater. But there's no, when you mentioned about local subdivisions being able to make some decisions. I look at something, knowing that LB 775 in rural areas has created a lot of meatpacking plants. I'm not for or against them, but what they have done, sort of accidentally, or this is how the labor market is. We have a lot of immigrants. Let's take Lexington or some town like that, and the immigrants come in. They're hard workers. You know, no one's got a problem with that. But because of cultural shifts, because of the increase in students in school districts, those tax credits that the state gave away, the city has no kind of control over. It's great to have the business, but we're going to have a short-term necessity to spend some extra money.
And that's very much the case, and that has been shown. An economist friend of mine from Florida refers to these as the externalities of or external costs of economic development.
That aren't weighed in the $28,000 you were talking about, or the $58,000.
And there are also external benefits, to be honest, in terms of people paying increased property taxes, income taxes, and things like that. But you do have those types of effects. You also have, in a lot of areas, affordable housing issues. Suddenly you might have an influx of 6,000 workers and there aren't 6,000 beds available.
And then you have an incredible skew in property values and supply and demand, and that maybe a community, it's like a culture shock to that community. I mean, not culture, but economic shock. And these things normally happen slowly and gradually.
And again, this should be all a part of a periodic evaluation of what the effects of the program are, not just the direct effects in terms of jobs created or taxes increased, but what have been the costs to society, because ultimately there are certain costs that can't be captured simply in terms of a job created. There's also certain benefits that you can't capture in that sense also.
So we are still competing with other states. I think it was one of Ernie Goss's fellow researchers that said economic development incentives are a zero-sum game in a sense, because one state may gain for whatever combination of incentives or situations that in addition, and then 49 lose. And this game is happening all over it, but they are going to continue.
They are going to continue, I think, unless somebody steps in at a higher level. In Minnesota, one of my friends who works for the Federal Reserve Bank of Minnesota as a researcher referred to the strategy as the ultimatum game that businesses play. They will say oftentimes to a local government there or the state government here, unless you give us a particular incentive package, we won't move here. Now, are they being truthful about that? Maybe yes, maybe no, but the point is there's no way for the local or state government to figure that out. So they may grant them an incentive that even if the business was going to move here in the first place, there's just no way to tell is the bottom line.
They play a good game of poker, don't they?
And that's their role. I wouldn't suggest that they do anything else. Their job in our society is to make money. However, I think it's the job of certainly of the government, but also those people who advise the government, like me, to tell people there may be a different set of things you could think about.
This is a little nebulous, but corporations, and God bless them, they fuel the economy. They do all kinds of things. This is capitalistic nirvana. I mean, the United States.
The primary source of income for most citizens is their jobs. So
absolutely.
If you're concerned about increasing the welfare of citizens, there have to be jobs.
But part of what is built into the efficiency of a corporation, if it's a well-run corporation, is having the expertise to analyze everything to their advantage. Looking at it every way from Sunday.
Exactly.
Do the states are they doing the same thing on their behalf and on the behalf of the taxpayers?
Certainly certain states are.
I mean, they're probably trying, but I mean, is that a goal? That should be, to me, you should be as well armed in this race.
Well, you know, teaching in School of Public Administration, what I'd say is they should hire a bunch of our graduates to provide.
And then listen to them.
Then they could give money back to our school. But in all seriousness, I think what you need to do is you need to build in the mechanisms so that there's oversight. And there's also accountability. Again, returning to an earlier point, is what tends to force people to be a little bit more thoughtful about things in government is the fact that they have to specifically take responsibility for the decision. And if I could say that I have one particular criticism about LB 775 is, again, it's primarily become an entitlement program. If the business meets or at least agrees to meet certain goals, they get it.
Stamp.
Yep. And so nobody has. It becomes something that everybody can hide behind LB 775 and say, look at us, we brought these jobs in, and not have to suffer the repercussions if one of the businesses shuts down and leaves.
Okay, so let's, in a perfect world, if we repeal this or not, we certainly will be looking at other kinds of packages, permutations, and combinations down the road. I mean, I think that's inevitable. Are folks like you that are knowledgeable going to put together something that when we taxpayers feel we are helpless to determine the value of these things, and that it's going to go through based on the good intentions of commerce in this state and the good intentions of legislators, and we just give up. We don't understand it. We'll just have to trust you. Are we going to have a way to get more engaged in that so we can understand?
Well, I hope so. And I hope to be able to provide things, and I certainly know that my colleagues would love to provide input on these types of decisions. One of the interesting things about economic development, though, is there seem to be so many answers. If you look historically at research that's been done about just the effectiveness of bringing businesses to a state or a local government or local area using incentives, about the only way you can really be honest about the results of that literature is maybe yes, maybe no. And so, unfortunately, I think what we need to do is we need to continue to plunge ahead and try and come up with the best possible ways of measuring these things. Certainly the work that Professor Goss has done down at Creighton, or Professor Anderson at University of Nebraska at Lincoln has done a lot in this area, should inform the public policy debate. And what I think we should look for as citizens is to have that kind of debate, and also to look for people who are trying to help people think through, what do you want from your economic development program? Do you want jobs? Yes, but if you concentrate so much on jobs, maybe you're giving up investment in businesses that down the road will create jobs. So maybe you want to concentrate on capital investment. I don't know, and I can't tell people that. What I can do is simply tell people what we know, or at least we think we know, about what some effective ways to do that are.
But with your previous statement, what I'm guessing you're saying is regarding the entitlement kind of feeling that LB 775 has, is that no matter what we pass or what combination of things we pass, that states and or municipalities or counties should be able to at least determine their fate a little and say, is this good for us?
Yes, just like any public program. I think that, and maybe this is ivory tower of me, but I think we should expect out of our government that we should be at least able to have third parties, independent third parties, come in and say, is this program working? What are we specifically getting for our investment as citizens of the state of Nebraska? And are there effects regionally, like you brought up? Are we shifting jobs simply to Omaha and Lincoln from Grand Island and Scotts Bluff and places like that?
So when we put these things together, again, do you think that the people will be more engaged since we sort of did this in a panic? I mean, basically they said, we need an incentive, we need to compete, we need influx of investment into properties, plants, whatever, and we need jobs.
Well, I hope
and
people
they threw
are
them in
more
there.
engaged. I think a lot of it will be the particular mechanics or dynamics of how the discussion is framed. I find it interesting that there was a panic, and I grew up in Iowa. I was growing up in Iowa during this time, and I was actually in college during the time when LB 775 was passed, and I remember the economy during that time, and things weren't good. But I think we also have to consider our own particular circumstances in Nebraska. Contrary to popular belief, unless somebody can produce evidence, strong evidence otherwise, we're not a high-tax state. We aren't somebody that needs to necessarily have huge incentive programs because we don't tax businesses overly. We're below the national average on most measures of business tax burden.
Seriously, I get the feeling because we don't have our tax base spread out, on a wide playing area as a lot of states, that I've gotten the impression we're just outrageous.
Yeah, and certainly that I think that's been communicated in lots of different ways, but most of the studies that have looked at overall business tax burdens as a percent of the income that we all earn or other broad measures of the tax base indicate we're anywhere from 32nd to 46th in the nation in terms of business tax burden.
So we're not detestable at face value by corporations.
Not by any means. And the other thing is we also have to consider economic development in a broader context. Economic development is just not about taxes. A person who I know who used to do business consulting for a group called Fantas Consulting, they developed all the models to help businesses think about where they locate, did a study where he looked at, out of all the decisions he had helped businesses do, where taxes fit in, and they fit in only a very small part. Most of the things that were important were labor costs, transportation costs, and access to markets. Now, access to markets, we really can't do a whole lot about. But we can do things in terms of improving our labor productivity, so our costs are in line with our labor productivity, and increasing our transportation capacity so that businesses will be able to reduce their transportation costs.
One of the things as we start to wind up, this is bringing something from left field, but I know that within the Omaha Chamber of Commerce, at least I'm not up to total date on this, but recently they have looked at research and development, medical related fields as priorities, given what we have here, Peter Kiewit Institute, research and development. Those aren't often thought of right off the top as having a lot of jobs, although there's sometimes a lot of plant involved. That's one of the things that we have no way to tailor our going after that, you know, that we're good at here.
That's exactly right, Carol. And I think the important thing is that LB 775 is not in a great position to help those maybe 3 or 4 person research and development or information technology type companies that are just starting up that may someday hire 15 or 20 people.
In fact, we have cut back on our funding to small businesses, what do they call them?
Micro enterprise credit.
Micro enterprise credit. So we have a menu of things we need to look at in the next couple of years.
Economists suggest that you should have a broad range of programs to help not only large businesses but small businesses.
We don't have a broad range of time here, though. So I want to thank you. I just wanted you to give people something to think about, that this isn't impossible, and maybe they'll have an idea or two for their lawmakers.
I mean, citizens need to get involved. That's the bottom line.
Dr. I should say, Kenneth Kriz, thank you for joining us, and keep that School of Public Administration in tow over there across campus. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for joining us on Consider This. Check out our website, too.
To view this edition of Consider This or past programs, visit our website at unotv.unomaha.edu. For comments or questions, call 402-554-2516 during regular business hours. Consider This is a production of UNO Television.